The first thing I learned about Juliana Thorne was that silence was her native language. It wasn't an absence of sound but a presence, a physical weight in the room that pressed on your chest and demanded respect. Her office on the 52nd floor was a glass-walled cage overlooking a city that seemed to worship at her feet. My own desk was just outside, a small, pale moon in orbit of her blazing sun. I was 24, running from the scorched earth of a relationship that had ended in betrayal and eviction, and this job, personal assistant to the CEO of Thorne Consolidated, was the life raft I'd clung to in a storm of my own making. The job description had been terrifyingly vague: anticipate needs, solve problems, maintain absolute discretion. It paid more than I'd ever made, enough to afford a tiny apartment that didn't smell like my ex's broken promises. My predecessor, a woman with a permanently startled expression, had lasted 3 weeks. On my first day, she'd handed me a single sheet of paper titled The Preferences. It listed everything from the precise temperature of Ms. Thorne's morning coffee, black, 185 degrees Fahrenheit, to the brand of ink she preferred in her pens, a specific Japanese import that cost $30 a cartridge. The final line read, "Do not speak unless spoken to. Do not offer opinions. Do not be noticed." It felt less like a job and more like a set of rules for becoming a ghost. For the first month, I followed them religiously. I was a phantom in a sensible blazer, fetching coffee, managing a schedule that would make world leaders weep, and communicating primarily through sterile emails. I learned the rhythm of her days through the sound of her heels on the marble floor, the soft click of her office door, the faint scent of sandalwood and old paper that trailed in her wake. I saw her only in glimpses, a severe silhouette against the skyline, a hand gesturing dismissively during a conference call, the hard line of her jaw as she eviscerated some unfortunate vice president. She was less a person and more a concept, an icon of power carved from ice. I was certain she didn't even know my name. I was just the new girl, a temporary fixture in her unbreachable world. The mistake, when it happened, was small. It was a Tuesday, the sky outside a bruised purple with impending rain. She'd been in meetings since dawn, a brutal back-to-back marathon. The catering for her final meeting, a late-evening negotiation with a German firm, was wrong. They'd sent sandwiches when she'd specifically requested sushi. A trivial error, but I knew from the preferences that Ms. Thorne despised cucumber, and every single sandwich was laced with it. My predecessor would have panicked, or worse, done nothing. I saw the muscle jump in Ms. Thorne's jaw when she saw the platter. Before anyone could speak, I stepped forward. "My apologies, Ms. Thorne. There's been a supplier error. A new delivery is en route. It will be here in 15 minutes. It was a lie." I'd ordered it myself the moment I saw the mistake, paying with my own credit card, my heart hammering against my ribs. She didn't look at me, but gave a curt, almost imperceptible nod. The meeting continued. Later that night, long after the Germans had left and the city lights had begun to blur into a glittering tapestry below, she called me into her office. I walked in expecting to be fired. The room was dark, save for a single lamp casting a warm glow on her massive mahogany desk. She was standing by the window, her back to me. "The sushi was acceptable," she said, her voice softer than I'd ever heard it, stripped of its boardroom armor. "You handled that, it wasn't a question." "I did," I managed, my voice a squeak. She turned, and for the first time, she really looked at me. Her eyes were a startlingly clear gray, exhausted and ancient. "Leave the receipt with finance. They will reimburse you." She paused, her gaze lingering. "What is your name?" "Alara," I said, my throat dry. "Alara," she repeated, tasting the word. It sounded foreign and fragile in that vast, silent room. "Don't let it happen again." It was a dismissal, but it felt like something else entirely. It felt like I had, for a single moment, been noticed. That small crack in her facade became a fissure. The rules began to bend, then break, not with any formal declaration, but through a series of quiet, unspoken shifts. A week after the sushi incident, she asked me to stay late. Not to work, but to organize the floor-to-ceiling bookshelves that lined one wall of her office. "The current system is illogical," she stated, gesturing vaguely at the leather-bound volumes. "Organize them." By genre, then alphabetically by author. It was a personal task, a curator's job, not an assistant's. For 3 nights, I worked in the quiet hum of her office after everyone else had gone home, the scent of her perfume clinging to the air. I ran my fingers over the spines of books on maritime law, Renaissance poetry, and theoretical physics. I discovered she had a surprising affection for worn, dog-eared paperback mysteries, tucked away on a lower shelf like a guilty secret. On the 3rd night, she didn't leave. She sat at her desk, ostensibly working, but I would catch her watching me in the reflection of the dark window. "You're very thorough, Alara," she commented, her voice startling me from my focused state. I was on a ladder, reaching for a high shelf. "I like things to be in their proper place," I replied, not looking down. I could feel her gaze on me, a tangible pressure. "And what is your proper place?" The question hung in the air, intimate and strange. I had no answer. I simply placed the book on the shelf and descended the ladder, my hands trembling slightly. She was testing me, I realized. Not my competence, but something else. Something I couldn't yet name. The domestic tasks escalated. She started having me order her dinner, not to the office, but to her penthouse upstairs. "I'll be working late. Just have it sent up," then it became, "Tell me what you ordered for me, then order something for yourself as well. Eat at your desk. I can't have you fainting." We would eat in our separate spaces, connected by a few hundred feet of wire and concrete, and I would wonder if she was eating the same spicy Thai noodles, if she was thinking, as I was, about the strangeness of the shared, solitary meal. One Friday, a storm rolled in, a violent, angry thing that lashed the windows with sheets of rain and made the building sway almost imperceptibly. The power flickered. She called me into her office just as I was packing up to leave. "The roads will be a mess. It's not safe for you to travel." Her tone was flat, a statement of fact. "You can wait it out here," but the storm didn't pass. It raged for hours. Around 10, she finally looked up from her computer. "This is ridiculous," she said, more to herself than to me. "Come upstairs." My heart stopped. Upstairs was her home. Her sanctuary. The place no employee ever went. "Miss Thorne, I couldn't possibly." "Don't be difficult, Alara. It's in order." The elevator ride was the longest of my life. Her penthouse was not what I expected. It was stark and minimalist, all glass and steel and shades of gray, like her office. But it was also achingly lonely. There were no photographs, no clutter, no signs of a life lived, only beautiful empty spaces. It was a museum of a person, not a home. She gestured toward a sprawling white sofa. "Sit." She disappeared into a kitchen I couldn't see and returned with 2 glasses and a bottle of whiskey that was probably worth more than my rent. She poured 2 fingers in each glass and handed one to me. Our fingers brushed. A jolt, sharp and electric, shot up my arm. Her eyes met mine for a fraction of a second, and I saw something flicker there. Surprise, maybe. Or recognition. We sat in silence for a long time, the only sounds the drumming of the rain and the distant wail of a siren. The whiskey burned a warm path down my throat. "Why do you work for me?" she asked abruptly, her voice low. She was looking out at the storm, at the lightning that briefly illuminated the chaos. "I needed a job," I said honestly. "I needed to start over." "We're all starting over, all the time," she murmured. "We just pretend we're continuing on the same path." She took a sip of her drink, the crystal glass looking impossibly delicate in her hand. "My husband, my late husband, built this company. He designed this apartment. He believed that if you built high enough, you could see past the horizon, that you wouldn't be touched by the mess on the ground." Her voice was devoid of emotion, a simple recitation of history. He was wrong. The mess always finds you. I didn't know what to say. This was a confidence so far beyond the bounds of our professional relationship that I felt like an intruder. I was seeing the woman behind the CEO, the raw, wounded person beneath the layers of tailored wool and impenetrable authority. And she was lonely. The realization hit me with the force of a physical blow. Her power, her wealth, her skyscraper, it was all just a cage. A beautiful empty cage. "He also collected those mystery novels," I said softly, surprising myself. "The ones on the bottom shelf." Her head snapped toward me. Her gray eyes were wide, vulnerable. A wall had just crumbled into dust. How did you know? I noticed, I said. They seemed well loved. Different from the others, she stared at me, and the silence stretched, but this time it wasn't heavy. It was something else. It was open. Waiting. He read them to me, she said, her voice barely a whisper. When I couldn't sleep, and there it was. The key. The motive. It had nothing to do with work. She hadn't been testing my skills as an assistant. She was testing my ability to see. After that night, the pretense of a purely professional relationship dissolved, replaced by a fragile, undefined intimacy. We still called each other Ms. Thorne and Alara. I still fetched her coffee and managed her schedule. But now, there were other duties. We'd have lunch in her office, the door closed, discussing not mergers and acquisitions, but the merits of a particular author or a piece of classical music she'd been listening to. She started asking for my opinion. Which tie for the Tokyo trip, Alara? The blue or the silver? What do you think of this proposal's language? Is it too aggressive? I was no longer a ghost. I was a sounding board, a confidant. She was slowly, cautiously, letting me in. I was becoming the sole occupant of her isolated world, and the proximity was both terrifying and exhilarating. My feelings for her were a tangled knot of admiration, fear, and a deep, aching desire that I tried to push down, to label as inappropriate or a symptom of my own loneliness. But it was useless. I was captivated by the contradictions of her, the steel in her voice on a conference call, and the softness in her eyes when she spoke of a book she loved. The way she commanded a boardroom of powerful men, and the way her hand trembled slightly when she reached for her glass of whiskey at the end of a long day. I was falling for the woman she kept hidden from the world, and I knew, with a certainty that frightened me, that she was letting me see her on purpose. She wanted to be seen. By me. The breaking point came on a Thursday. She was preparing for a gala, a massive corporate event she dreaded. I was in her penthouse, helping her get ready. Not my job, not even close, but she'd asked, and I couldn't say no. I was adjusting the back of her gown, a column of midnight blue silk that clung to her frame. My fingers grazed the bare skin of her back, and the air crackled. I could feel the warmth of her, smell the faint scent of her perfume. My breath hitched. "Is it straight?" she asked, her voice tight. She was watching my reflection in the full-length mirror, her gray eyes dark and intense. "Yes," I whispered, my hand lingering for a moment too long. I should have pulled away, retreated to my professional corner. But I couldn't. Her gaze held mine in the mirror. Everything we hadn't said, everything we had been building between us for months, was in that look. Longing. Fear. A desperate, shared loneliness. "Don't go," I heard myself say, the words escaping before I could stop them. "What?" she breathed, her voice raspy. "Don't go to the gala. Stay here." It was an insane, career-destroying thing to say. But I didn't care about my career anymore. I only cared about the hollow ache in her eyes. She turned around slowly, her movements deliberate. We were inches apart. I could see the fine lines around her eyes, the pulse beating at the base of her throat. She reached up, not with the confidence of a CEO, but with a hesitant, trembling hand, and cupped my cheek. Her thumb stroked my skin, and my whole world tilted on its axis. "Alara," she whispered, and my name was a prayer, a confession. "Do you have any idea what you're doing to me?" "I think so," I said, my voice shaking. "I hope so," and then she closed the distance, and her lips met mine. It wasn't a kiss of passion, not at first. It was a kiss of profound, soul-deep relief. It was the breaking of a dam, the surrender of two people who had been drowning in their own solitude. It was quiet, and it was tender, and it was everything. The world did not end. The company did not collapse. The next morning, I woke up in her bed, tangled in white sheets that smelled like her. The city was waking up below us, a distant, muffled hum. She was already awake, sitting in an armchair by the window, a cup of coffee in her hand, wearing a simple silk robe. For a moment, I was terrified. What now? Would she regret it? Would she fire me, send me away with a severance package and a non-disclosure agreement? She turned and saw I was awake. A small, genuine smile touched her lips. It transformed her face, erasing the years and the burdens. "Good morning, Alara," she said, her voice soft. I sat up, clutching the sheet to my chest. "Good morning." Juliana, using her first name, felt like crossing a final, irrevocable line. She nodded, accepting it. "I made coffee," she said, as if it were the most normal thing in the world. As if I hadn't just completely dismantled the careful architecture of our lives. I got out of bed, wrapped a sheet around myself, and walked over to her. She handed me the cup. Our fingers brushed, and this time, the jolt was one of sweet familiarity. I sat on the floor at her feet, leaning my head against her knees, and we watched the sun rise over the city. There were a million questions. How would this work? What would people say? What were we to each other? But none of it mattered in that moment. The silence between us was no longer a weight. It was a comfort. A shared space where we didn't need words. Her hand came down to rest in my hair, her fingers gently stroking my scalp. It wasn't the touch of a boss or even of a lover. It was the touch of someone who had found their home. We figured it out. It was messy and complicated and required a level of discretion I'd only read about in spy novels. I resigned my position, a move that sent shockwaves of gossip through the company. Juliana promoted her department head and hired a new, strictly professional male assistant. To the outside world, I was just a former employee who had moved on. To us, it was the only way. I moved into the penthouse. At first, it felt like I was an imposter in that vast, empty space. But slowly, we made it a home. I bought plants, which she watered with a surprising tenderness. I put up photographs on the stark white walls. I filled the silent rooms with music. I replaced the perfectly curated, unread books on the main shelves with paperbacks we'd both read, their spines cracked with love. Juliana, in turn, began to shed the armor she'd worn for so long. She started leaving work at a reasonable hour. She learned to cook, badly at first, and we would laugh until we cried over burnt pasta and collapsed soufflés. She taught me about art, and I taught her how to relax, how to simply be. I discovered her humor was dry and wicked, and her laugh, when it came, was a rare and beautiful sound. She wasn't my boss anymore. She was my partner. She was the woman who read mystery novels to me when I couldn't sleep, whose hand I held as we walked through the park on a Sunday, completely anonymous and completely free. Sometimes, late at night, when the city is a glittering jewel box below us, I think about that first day. The terrified girl in the sensible blazer, following a list of rules designed to make her invisible. I think about the formidable CEO in her glass cage, ruling over a silent kingdom. It feels like a different lifetime, a story about two other people. They were both so lost, so trapped by the walls they had built around themselves. I came to her looking for a job, a way to survive. But what she was looking for had nothing to do with work. She wasn't hiring an assistant. She was searching for a witness. Someone to see past the power and the prestige, to find the lonely woman standing in a storm. Someone to help her organize the illogical pieces of her life and put them in their proper place. I look over at her now, asleep beside me, the hard lines of her face softened in the moonlight, and I know I've found my proper place, too. It was never behind a desk outside her office. It was always right here,